We're very happy to have you here, and please welcome Cathy.
I feel a lot like Madonna with the headpiece, although they're not really made for women with earrings, so hopefully I don't clank too much. Thank you very much for the kind introduction, and I would like to, of course, firstly acknowledge the City of Malmö. The presentation this morning from the Deputy Mayor was very similar to a presentation that I would give as an elected rep, talking about the great things of this city, and I know that the City of Melbourne has looked to Malmö often when we're looking at our green policies, and so I'm very glad to be back here. I did spend 2 weeks in Malmö during the COP that was in Copenhagen, going back and forwards across the bridge in the snow, in the dark, so I'm glad to be here in the sunlight, in the daylight, and I can see the city a lot better than I did then, and obviously we spent a lot of time in the Bella Centre. Thank you to the Green Surge team, to Anton and Stephen and Cecil and obviously Thomas and all of you who have been involved in the Green Surge project. It's really an impressive body of work, and the City of Melbourne, is proud of using evidence to back our policies, and I've already learned a lot from reading the reports from your website, and I too, like Maria, look forward to taking that brick home with me in the suitcase and sharing that not only with my City of Melbourne colleagues, but as Thomas mentioned, I also work at the University of Melbourne in a much smaller research group than Green Surge, but it's very similar. It's multi-universities, multi-city, looking at nature-based solutions and environmental quality in cities. And the one thing in acknowledging Maria and her incredibly important role to you at Green Surge is that you have had the one project contact point at the EU, at the European Commission, is rare, incredibly rare, and I know as a researcher and as a knowledge broker, I spend a lot of time talking to policymakers and also to researchers, and it's not about being the translator in between. I'm trying my hardest to bring it together, knowledge brokering from both sides, but having the single contact point for the entire project and someone who's obviously very passionate in the area of nature-based solution is incredibly rare. So I'm sure everyone is very grateful, and I wish that I had a Maria in the department that I work with, in the Department of Environment. We're also very jealous of the amount of money that you have for Horizon 2020 and the precursor funds that have funded Green Surge. It's just the dollars that we could only dream about in Australia to spend on green infrastructure projects or projects related to climate change and adaptation mitigation measures. But the City of Melbourne does like to think that we're a bit of a leader in this space, and so much of what I will be presenting today is, the reasons from my perspective as an elected representative, as someone in the research community as well. From my perspective, the three success factors for adoption of nature-based solutions in the City of Melbourne, and I will do that shortly. But I just wanted to touch on to start, that 2017 is a pivotal time for cities all around the world. It's 20 years since the Kyoto Protocol was formally adopted, 25 years at least since Rio Earth Summit, and 2 years on from COP21 in Paris. It was a great celebration, wasn't it? And as we prepare for the next UN climate conference in Bonn in this November, cities once again will be on the stage leading, where some of our global leaders are not. And cities know that we've got no time to waste. We can't be complacent. We have to get on with meeting our ambitious goals. And Malmö and Melbourne and many cities and the networks that Melbourne is very proud to be a part of, with ICLEI and C40 and the resilient city networks, all that we host at the City of Melbourne. We know that we can see inspiration in the cities through these networks, and we know that together we can actually make a significant difference. Of course, we need all levels of government to act, but we won't sit around waiting. And consortiums like Green Surge and all of the research that you've been working on for many years show the possibilities of cities and the opportunities that we have as well, and that working in partnership with evidence, on-the-ground implementation, this is really at the forefront of research, and we can achieve great things. And as I said, over the next 20 minutes, I'll showcase work that we've been over. It's not overnight, it's been over 20, 30 years. And I'd like to acknowledge there are an amazing group of people at the City of Melbourne in our urban sustainability team. Rob Adams, Ian Shears, Yvonne Lynch, David Callow, Curly Herzog, who are all significant contributors over many years to the work that I will present, as well as our research community through University of Melbourne and RMIT in particular. A lot of their research is in the slides that I'll present. But I wanted to begin with an image of a person who's inspired me and my interest in how best to approach nature-based solutions in cities. This is Deborah Roberts. You may or may not know her. She's a long-time climate advisor to ICLEI. She's from the City of Durban. She works with the Resilient Cities Network and is now one of the co-chairs of the IPCC. And in particular, she's driving the role of cities there. In her recent keynote address in Melbourne at the World Eco-City Summit, she called for participants at the conference to seek out boundary-busting knowledgepreneurs. Oh, so I just knew I forgot to set my clock. She called for boundary-busting knowledgepreneurs, not just at the conference, not just in the people that you talk to at the tea breaks, not just in the presentations that you will choose to go to after this session, but in the places that you work in. And I know that Helena was talking about this morning, knowledge translation is so important, and I think that really comes from understanding how different people interpret your work and how different people perceive your work. Knowledge translation is something that's incredibly important to my work now. I was first elected to the City of Melbourne in 2008, and I came to that role with a science PhD. I'd worked in the non-profit sector and I'd also worked in the private sector. In 2012, still as an elected councillor, I went back into research after 10 years, and it really changed my perspective of how research is taken up by city practitioners. And maybe that's why I'm now called this knowledge broker. The importance of knowledge translation is a key component of research. It's about evidence-based policy being the main driver of a lot of my work, and it says researchers, we need to make sure that our research has impact. We need to make sure that it's getting to the right people, getting to the end users. And I know that a lot of this is written in the Green Surge work about the collaboration of research, industry, decision makers, citizens working together to seek greater success, implementation, take-up of your work. So a little bit about Melbourne. Not sure who's been to Melbourne? Woo-hoo. A few people have been to Melbourne. It's on the other side of the world, at the bottom of Australia. It is the second largest city in Australia, but it's growing rapidly and growing the fastest. You might cringe, but Melbourne was named the most livable city in the world for the 7th year in a row most recently. And I said you might cringe because I do too. I find it difficult reading speeches saying we're the most livable. It isn't a holistic measure. It's obviously a snapshot of a range of indicators, but maybe not the indicators that you care or that I necessarily care about. But that said, of course, I do love Melbourne. And there's no denying that we have a very good quality of life. We have great coffee, we have the best football, we have great art and culture. And importantly, we're surrounded by these amazing parks and gardens that were designed and planted for us a long time ago, maybe not for you, but over 100 years ago. And I think it's those green spaces, the green lungs that surround our city that do make it a very livable place to live. And on paper, we're also very bright. We've got a strong economy. We're doubling our residential population, and it's growing even more, in particular into the centre of the city. A lot more people are coming to live in the centre of the city. And it's about to become, in fact, 5 times greater in size. And it's, as I said before, it's growing faster than any other city in Australia. Whether this is a good thing or a bad thing, certainly it's a challenge we need to look at. And it's similar. I know that the Deputy Mayor mentioned population growth as one of the challenges here in Malmö. And it's one of our challenges, along with economic uncertainty, technology, change, disruption, but above all, and one of our greatest focuses is on the greatest challenge of climate change. In Melbourne, we're already subject to a host of extreme weather events: droughts, flooding, storm surges, I think you call it cloudbursts, not to mention the urban heat island effect. By 2030, the CSIRO predicts that Melbourne will be significantly affected by warmer temperatures and heat waves, lower rainfall, intense storm events, flash flooding. And by 2070, we're predicted to be experiencing more than double the number of heat waves. And these these changes impact businesses and the community health and well-being. Heat-related death and business stress are already significant. Millions of dollars are lost during our very hot days that are getting longer and more often, and unfortunately many people are dying in the heat waves as well, more so than in the bushfires that you see and are obviously tragic, and many lives are lost, but more lives are lost during the heat waves. And we know that a successful future of Melbourne depends on understanding those risks, reducing their impact, being more resilient, and heat is a key driver of this. So faced with these challenges, over many years we've responded by developing an ecosystems-based approach to climate adaptation, where the goal is to lower the temperatures in summer by 4 degrees Celsius. We also have zero net emission strategies, resilient Melbourne strategies, but today, and this slide in particular, focuses on our nature-based solutions. And through our city as a catchment, open space, urban forest, green roof, climate adaptation, urban nature strategies, we're aiming to increase stormwater harvesting, increase green open space, double our canopy by 20%, so double it to 40% by 2040, increase permeability and biodiversity. And this slide is very busy and it features lots of strategies, but it is one of my favourites. It's my favourite because I know that we're actually doing it. These strategies and plans are not just sitting on a shelf, and they aren't just being signed off and forgotten about. We've actually refreshed a lot of these strategies and plans. Many of these are in their third iteration, and that's because they've either come to the end of their life, we've completed the actions, or we've understood more about how we need to change our approach. And our zero net emission strategy, we're just about to align that to the Paris Accord. What does 1.5 mean to our zero net emission strategy? And our climate adaptation strategy is a world-leading example, and that's just recently been refreshed. And it does reference actually the city of Copenhagen and the city of Malmö in some of the policies that we're looking to implement in that strategy. So it's a good slide. I love this slide because I do get excited about what we are doing in nature-based solutions. I'm proud of the way that we're adapting our city for climate change, but we know that obviously a lot of these measures help us to mitigate as well. So from my perspective, why have we been successful? What are the success factors for implementing and adopting nature-based solutions? So I'm going to mention 3, and these are from my perspective why we're being successful. Get rid of some of these pieces of paper. So factor 1, I think you probably could guess what I think the 3 successful factors are. I know that it comes through your Green Surge research. But evidence, it's so important. Provide the evidence. It's the #1 driver of the acceptance of our nature-based solutions. We use data to inform all of our policy. And much of this data has been collected actually by Council, but also with the network of researchers that I mentioned before. We've got many great examples, and I know many people in this room have worked with my colleagues at the City of Melbourne. I'm just going to touch on a couple of them now. We have a lot of data on trees. I know Cecil knows about it. Cecil has presented in Melbourne as part of our urban forest strategy plans, and I know that Natalie works with our colleagues as well. I could present for the 3 days of your conference about all of the data that we have on our trees. Every single tree is mapped and geolocated. And you can find them, all the individual trees in our city, on this urban forest visual, and you'll find it on our website. So you can see there's different colours, and the different colours represent the life expectancy of the trees, and the different symbols represent the different tree genus. And so red means that the tree has a life expectancy of less than 10 years, but green means it has a life expectancy of over 61 years. So at a glance, you can, understand what's happening with our trees. You can identify the ones at a risk, and you can identify areas where priority needs to be placed. And each of the 70,000 trees have been assigned an individual email address using the tree asset identification number in our database. And with the click of a button, anyone can select a tree and report an issue. Let us know what's going on. They can communicate about the damage of a tree, whether it needs maintenance or whether it's at risk. And there was an unexpected but delightful side effect of this email function that I will show you in a moment. I know some of you already know what I'm going to show you. But the use of the knowledge of our current forest is helping us to plan our future forest. And this afternoon, as a bit of a plug, I am giving a presentation from Dave Kendall from the University of Melbourne, who's worked with us at the city on our trees' vulnerability to climate change. And it's one of the ways that we're looking at the evidence today to plant what we need to plant, so that those parks that we're very lucky to have that were planted over 100 years ago, we need to plant those parks now for the future. Another really important project we need to do is to increase greenery in our roofs and on the facades and in the private realm. And so a piece of evidence that we have gathered is which of the buildings in our central city are the most suitable for green roofs. And this is incredibly important if we're going to go and talk to the building owners about their roofs. We can prioritise, we can show the evidence, we can talk to people about the benefits, but we can also show that we've done the data. We know which ones we need to green first. And if you've ever been to Melbourne, as I saw some of you have, you'll know that we love our laneways. It might be influenced a bit by the Jan famous Jan from Copenhagen, but we certainly have embraced laneway life in Melbourne, maybe because there's lots of coffee in the laneways. But the geniuses at the City of Melbourne decided to bring together this love of laneways and coffees and greenery into this Green Your Laneway project. So alongside the University of Melbourne researchers, they've developed an online map and that indicates which of the laneways in our city are best suited for greenery. And the green and the red have been assigned based on sunlight and wind exposure, with obviously green being the most suitable and red being the least suitable. And then armed with the evidence about which laneways we could green, we then spoke to the community, spoke to the residents, asked them which of these laneways would you like to be greened. And it became an amazing place-making activity, incredibly important, using greenery, our need to cool our city, as an opportunity to also talk to our residents and our community about nature. We were overwhelmed by the response. So many of these blue dots are hundreds and thousands of blue dots of people voting for the laneway they wanted to be greened. And we have committed to greening 4 lanes for the next 4 years. So there'll be 16 green lanes completed. But really importantly, they've been designed with the community as well. And again, it's a place-making activity, and it's about increasing the economy and social and environmental resilience of our city. So the second success factor, I think, for adoption of our nature-based strategies is water management. I know we're talking about green and blue being really important, and I think it is critical to our success. We've learned a lot as a city through droughts. However, even if we have achieved significant water efficiency as a result, expanding our urban forest and green infrastructure is going to increase water consumption. So understanding water has been and will continue to be critical to our success. We've not only introduced various water-sensitive design treatments in the city, such as the tree pits down here, but we're also looking at the city from a systems perspective, which is helping us to manage floods. We have extensive knowledge of the system's ecology and the water catchment, and we know that currently we only capture 1% of the 500 billion litres of water that falls in our city each year. So this wetland here was established over 8 years ago, is connected to a pipe way upstream, and it collects runoff from a major road. It allows us to use this water on a parkland nearby. We also recently announced a new $3 million underground water tank. It's apparently the first in Australia to combine flood mitigation and stormwater harvesting right in the centre of the city to avoid flooding the trams, like in the image that you just saw. And projects like this will help reach our target of sourcing 50% of our water from non-drinking sources in coming years and eliminate those flood spots that I mentioned before. This is a very fuzzy slide, but really the website at the top is maybe the most important part, where you can see all of the water-saving initiatives in our municipality, and there's a lot of information on there about the role of water in the city, and it's an important engagement tool with our community, which we all know, and I know that you know in the Green Search research that engaging the community is incredibly important and leads on to the third success factor, and probably the most important success factor for Melbourne is and has been how we approach community engagement. If you don't bring the residents, businesses, visitors along with you, it's very difficult to achieve the outcomes that you need for sustainable cities. In the City of Melbourne, we've turned a lot of minds around. It hasn't been overnight. We've taken a few iterations, but it's often been challenging. People love their trees. They have favourite trees, and often that favourite tree is not the right tree. It's not the most resilient, or it's red on the map. It's about to die, and we need to do something about it. And the changes that we do need to make to Melbourne's landscape are going to be quite significant. They're going to be quite dramatic, and we must plant the trees, we must change the trees that we plant to have a robust and resilient forest. And it can be quite emotional for people. But not acknowledging that emotion in your community engagement process can be the failure of your project. I know that as a scientist, I started the urban forest process very much the data. But it was when I talked to some artists about the impact of the red dots on our maps that the trees were going to die, and they all started crying, and I was quite profoundly impacted, but they changed our approach, and we engaged artists a lot more in our strategy and a lot more in how we engage with the community. Incredibly important. We need to show evidence from a range of perspectives if we want to bring people along. And cities around Australia are not accepting climate change, and I wonder if that's because we're not talking to people in communities about how and why the changes affect them in the communities that they know, not through lots of data and graphs and potentially scary things. So we talk to our community about the principles of the urban forest, and about our nature-based strategies. We talk to them about what we're doing and why we're doing it. We talk to them in their neighbourhoods, and we talk to them in their streets. They can choose the trees that they will see, and we know from our tree palette that they're choosing the right ones. They might be choosing a tree that looks exactly like that favourite tree that they didn't want to be removed, but we know that it's a different species, and that it will be make sure that we have a robust forest in the future. We also have an amazing citizen forester group, and they're collecting invaluable data on our trees, and they're going to be critical in helping us to value trees into the future. And they're helping us to collect a lot of information about biodiversity. I haven't talked about biodiversity in this presentation, but it's very important to me, and I have our nature strategy with us here. But one community engagement project that we have done is we've taken a lot of data about the bugs, the little things that run our city. The bugs from our parks and gardens have been turned into this amazing children's book, which you can actually download, but I have a few hard copies here if you're really into bugs too. But it's a very important engagement tool. I also promised I'd talk to you about what happened when we put email addresses on our trees. Again, some of you have seen this already, but one of the unexpected things that happened from the Email a Tree program was that people, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people started emailing, so maybe not hundreds, but thousands of people started sending love letters to our trees. There was fan mail talking about their benefits and their virtue. It was obviously a functional exercise. It wasn't actually just so that people could email our trees, but it really engaged the community in a beautiful way. This is a beautiful, this is something that was sent into one of the trees, tree number 1066821. But importantly, there are a lot of us that think that technology removes us from nature, and it's true. You go to the park and maybe a lot of people are on their phones and they're not looking at the trees, but maybe they are. And it does, like I said before, we need to embrace the artistic side of the emotional side of trees. We also, through technology, we can also embrace other ways to engage the community. And it's a huge, it's a huge lesson for us. And something that I think is really important for the work that you've come up with as well. And we had a really good discussion about the opportunities for this further at the University of Copenhagen yesterday. So I've spoken about success. I know we're running out of time, but I did want to talk about some of our challenges. It hasn't been overnight, I mentioned before, and it's certainly an ongoing conversation and an ongoing challenge. The two challenges that I see, and I know there are lots of challenges, but the two that I see is that only 1/5 of the land in the City of Melbourne is publicly owned. So we won't realise our green goals, our urban nature goals, if we can't green the private spaces and buildings. And I know that that is touched on in some of the Green Surge findings as well. If we can capture the real value of nature and present the full economic, social, environmental benefits through a range of methods and languages, surely we must see a greater uptake of greening in the private realm. We just haven't quite got the right method yet, I don't think. And I can show an example of that. I mean, this isn't in the private realm, this is in the public realm, but this large park that we created, we turned a road basically into a park. But there was a huge battle to get it done. Despite the community's acceptance of our urban forest, of our urban nature, and I know that you've done a lot of research about people's values for nature, and we know the benefits of urban nature, but why is it that people still want to have the car outside of their house? Why is it that to get this huge increase of parkland in front of a house, and again we know through the research that there's an economic uplift of property having these green spaces in front of your house, why is it such a battle? And this park took 3 years and 3 attempts at the tribunal, the planning tribunal where the residents took us because they opposed the turning of the road into this park. Of course they now love it. It was hot, impenetrable, it was a single function road, it's now cool and treed, and people have a lot of barbecues and those health and wellbeing values that we know green space bring. This is an incredibly important project. But how do we translate those, the value for nature and the benefits into the private realm? And 2 quick projects that I won't dwell on, but I'm hoping to talk a lot more with some of the people here over the next couple of days. 2 attempts to get more greening uptake in the private realm is we have this new urban forest fund where it's hoping to be a $20 million fund where we'll be matching dollar for dollar for any private building owner that wants to green in the private realm. And we're getting quite a lot of interest, and the expressions of interest for the particular projects and also for the funds are open at the moment. We're also working with a lot of researchers in Melbourne on providing the evidence to increase the importance and the understanding of green infrastructure. And I've taken photos of some of the slides that were presented earlier today by Stephen on this work. But I think that knowledge translation piece is really important here. We need to make sure that if it's an academic exercise in looking at the value of green infrastructure, we need to make sure that that end product, the output, is talking in the language of the people we're trying to convince, the decision makers or the people in Treasury that are often in charge of large infrastructure projects. We need to make sure that that document or the research output that tells us the value of green infrastructure is presented in a way that means something to them, not just the academics, not just the politicians, because that's the only way that we're going to get change as far as I can see, because I know there's a lot of research on the value of green infrastructure. We need to just make sure that we're translating it better. So I'm really looking forward to the next 2 days. I know I said before I wasn't entirely convinced about our livable cities tag. I am proud of Melbourne, but I'll be even prouder, when we really have taken what we've succeeded to do in the public spaces of Melbourne and with our urban forest strategies and our other nature-based solutions. When we've really managed to get that into the private realm, then we will be a city that is livable, but it's also very connected to nature. Really important. And I really look forward to talking more about this on the panel with Cecil shortly. But thank you very much.